But my name is Ryan Smith. I'm the director of the fellowship using the science of engagement. I'm here at UT Austin. We're going to spend some time today talking about our program. Thank you, Cassie, for that. You can hear me. Thanks for that feedback. Again, thanks for the patience also as we had a technical glitch. But we're going to spend some time today talking about some of the background, the research behind the fellowship, kind of where we came from, as then look at one of our particular practices about reframing mistakes and how that helps teachers and students build that stronger engagement in the classroom. And then we'll talk a lot about what the fellowship for your teachers if they're going to join us next year. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. We live stream multiple different platforms. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If you are watching on LinkedIn or you're watching on Substack, either way, we'll be able to see those questions. So go ahead and post them there. Now I'm getting some feedback. Fix that. All right. So always like to start off with some of our data. Like I said, we've been around for about 4 years now with this version of the fellowship. And some of the best data that we've seen coming in, is really around, how teachers view the culture in their classroom, the mindset of their students. So really thrilled to show that, within 4 months into our program, Fuse teachers, are showing a reduction in their fixed mindsets by 25% into the program. Fuse teachers have students rated classroom cultures. Their students rate their classroom cultures 10% more respectful. And they report much less math anxiety in the class. We spend a lot of time with teachers thinking about how do we frame our language about mistakes? How do we talk about tests? How do we talk about grades? And all that leads to students feeling more at ease and more respected in the classroom. I'll talk a little bit about the reports that teachers get along the way as well. So they'll get some direct feedback from their students as to see if their particular students in their class are believing that it is a safe place to be, a safe place to make mistakes, safe place to raise their hand. They don't feel rushed, things like that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Our students are also performing better on their math outcomes. So students in our program, they do like a pre and a post math assessment with their teachers. It's really short. It's embedded within one of the modules that students do. But students in Fuse teachers' classrooms are performing better on those math items as well. And then our last piece of data we always like to share, because our belief around building a fellowship is that not only are our teachers in our program, getting a deep dive into adolescent development and thinking through some key practices, they're also building their network to feel more as a part of something maybe larger than what they're currently, a larger team than what they're with on their campus. And their students are being more, they're being more engaged in their classroom. They're more willing to raise their hand. They're more willing to take a risk. And all that leads to a better culture, better environment for both students and teachers. And students in our Fuse, or teachers in our Fuse program, are half as likely to report feeling burnt out or wanting to quit the profession. And that's specifically focusing on 6th through 9th grade math teachers, which I know when I was, working with Round Rock ISD, that was always a hard position to fill. And all the districts that I talked to around Texas and around the country, secondary math is a place that when we get good people in there, we really want to support them, really want to build them up and make them want to stay there. And we're seeing some great results within Fuse on that teacher retention piece as well. So that's just a little bit of our data. If this, what you're hearing today sounds interesting to you and you want to talk about how it can fit with your district or your campus, we can go into a lot more detail on the research and the background of our practices that we learn. But these are just some of the broad looks that we want to share. I didn't mention too in the beginning, there's a QR code in the upper left. So if you're, like I said, if what you're hearing is resonating with you and what you are hoping to achieve, with your programs and your support pieces on your districts and campuses, you can always scan that code right there and directly schedule a time for us to chat. We can really customize our experience, to fit your needs. So we want to get to know you better, get to know how our work might support some of the ideas and some of the plans that you already have for your campuses as well. So some background on kind of where Fuse comes from. So it's really 3 main researchers, thinkers, authors, professors that have developed much of the science and the research behind where we are coming from. Dr. David Yeager, he's our lead Fuse scientific director here at UT Austin and the leader of the Fuse program. So he is the person that works directly with your teachers. He shares with them many of the same adolescent development pieces and background and research that students in his courses here at UT get. He's also the author of 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People. Dr. Yeager was a lead grad student of Dr. Carol Dweck at Stanford, and the two of them have continued to collaborate and build out programs such as Fuse that help take their initial work on mindset development and really helping people to see their futures and their abilities as not being fixed. They worked together on so much of that early research, and David ran a lot of those programs, and now he and Dr. Dweck have worked together to really take that research, the next step of it, and build a program like Fuse, where that research goes beyond just being in papers and books and on binders on shelves and into practices that teachers can implement in classrooms. Dr. Uri Treisman, founder of the Dana Center here at UT, legendary calculus teacher. He is also a key member in the development, of Fuse. The practices that we learn from the way that he structures his courses here at UT, and in the ability to make students feel valued and that the level of rigor that he has, is attainable, has driven, a lot of our work in helping teachers around the state and around the country also build that culture within their classroom where the rigor is incredibly high, the expectations are high, but that level of support matches it. Dr. Treisman was really best well known for being able to take students from around Texas who were in the top 5% of their graduating class at their high schools, and really, whether or not they had a robust and rigorous calculus experience in high school, able to make them feel that they had the ability to be successful in his rigorous class and continue in their math journey once they got here. So we took a lot of his practices along with the research of Dr. Yeager and Dr. Dweck, and then tied them together with many of the practices that we were seeing in the UT On-Ramps programs. So On-Ramps is a dual credit enrollment program here at UT where high school students can earn college credit at the same time they're earning high school credit. And we did a study to find really some outliers and some bright spot teachers, in that program whose students were outperforming their peers on AP exams. And we, brought all those teachers, about 20 of them, to UT for a week and sat down and said, okay, how are you structuring, the culture in your classroom? How are you talking about mistakes? How are you talking about grades? To the fact that students in your class are earning those high scores on their AP exams, and a teacher down the hallway, maybe the students are not earning those same levels. And took a lot of their practices, tied it with the research from folks on our team, and developed a set of practices in the fellowship for teachers across the state and the country. We want to talk about the disengagement cycle today, because this really, ties together the crux of everything we try to accomplish, with Fuse. And it's taking this initial belief, that you often see with a young person, specifically in a math class. We have teachers from multiple different subject areas, but mainly it's students in math, that math is hard because I am bad at math. So that internalized message that the reason that I'm not getting the grade that I want to get, or that I don't understand what I'm looking at, I don't understand what my teacher's trying to explain to me, is somehow an inherent character flaw on my part. It's just because it's who I am. I've never been good at math. I'm just bad at math. And that internalized message is so, often seen specifically in students who reach that middle school, age. They've gone through elementary, maybe they've always struggled a little bit. They haven't received all these great messages about like, you're a great math student, and now they've kind of internalized that. And what we know about adolescence is that if you internalize a message like that and you see that that's who you are, then you're going to be much less likely to take a risk, to take a chance, to raise your hand and ask for help. So what do? If we're feeling that way, we hide our errors, right? We don't seek help. We don't believe that it's going to be a safe, experience to raise my hand and ask for help. Oftentimes, if I even have the opportunity to do a retest or come in for tutoring, I'm going to avoid that. All because during our adolescent years, we are so heightened, to worry about being embarrassed, about standing out in front of our peers in a negative way. In our program, we spend a lot of time talking with our teachers about, this age period between, for high schoolers and middle schoolers, kind of 11 to 18, and there's never a time in our life when we're more primed to kind of take on challenge and kind of, prove who we are in the world. It's when we make that transition from elementary, where we're kind of taken care of, and it's like, okay, societal wise for people to take care of us. But once we get to an adolescent, age period, we need to start being a contributor, and our expectations and our hormones are driving us to be a contributor. But at the same time, there's never a point in life where we're more worried about being embarrassed, because it like memory burns on us when something negative happens during that time. And if I'm afraid of that because of something that may have happened in the past or in a different class period, I'm not going to raise my hand and ask for help. And of course, if I don't raise my hand and ask for help, I'm going to continue that cycle of poor performance, right? I'm not going to get the help I need. I'm not going to do well on the next exam or project. And I'm going to just reconfirm this idea that math is hard because I am bad at math. So if we were going to on one slide, what your teachers learn in Fuse, what it's all about is like, how can we intervene right here with the way that we speak to young people to help alleviate, not make it go away, but help understand that that fear of embarrassment is there. It's okay. There's opportunities that come from it. But the impact of our language around some key points in every classroom is where we can disrupt this cycle and hopefully intervene like right here, where we can make it much less likely that somebody will feel unintentionally embarrassed often, by an adult. So I've already been talking about it a little bit, but it's this adolescent predicament, right? It's, I'm transitioning into puberty. I'm heading towards adulthood. I'm primed to be taking risks. I'm primed to be trying to prove my worth, prove my value, show that I'm a contributor to my class or my family or my tribe. But at the same time, I'm never more, attuned to not wanting to feel embarrassed or stand out in a negative way in front of my peers. So it's these two competing things that happen within every young person. If you have teenagers of your own or you're a teacher, you see this all the time. So that's the predicament that we often talk about, is in how in a math classroom or a science classroom can we take advantage, of that part of the predicament that primes our young people to take risks and take a challenge, but not, necessarily unintentionally, wander into the path where we're going to create this scenario where they might feel embarrassed and then not be able to take advantage of that opportunity. So we often start with our teachers with, okay, is there 100 years of adolescent development science in one slide, really trying to think about how can we flip that switch on maybe some of our past preconceptions about teenagers. So we know that teenagers' brains and hormones make them hypersensitive about status, how they look to others, how they feel about themselves. All right, I've talked about that with everybody this morning. We talk a lot with the teachers about that. We go into the detail on testosterone development and hormones and all kinds. We got a whole graph with lot of little type, all the different things happening in a young person's body. This sensitivity enhances the fear of failure in the classroom and beyond, right? So we've got two things happening. Hypersensitive about status, it enhances that fear of failure, but that's not all bad. It helps us transition to adulthood successfully. We want our young people being willing to take a risk and take a challenge. But we want them to be able to do that within their classroom as well, within their math classroom. So with this understanding, it's possible to harness that sensitivity and use it to promote deeper engagement and learning. So this is a big idea, that we work with teachers right off the bat, to better understand that, by understanding what's actually happening biologically, within a young person, that it's not necessarily a good idea just to like put them in a corner till they get through puberty and hope they get on the other side, successfully. There are things happening that we can take advantage of, as the teachers to make it more likely that they will take a risk, in a math classroom, things like that. But they're not going to do that if we don't change the perception of how they feel about the culture in their classroom. So this is a slide that a lot of folks, we'll post the slides here at the end. But a big piece around what we try to do in Fuse is to help teachers frame their language so they can create a perception, of a culture of learning in their class rather than a culture of compliance. When we interview students before they come into Fuse, or studies that we've done in the past of non-Fuse classrooms, and we ask them, what's the self-talk, that you're hearing if an adult, or a teacher, might say something that might make you feel like, we have tutoring, but it's not seen as like a safe place to come into, or my teacher is always saying how much we have to cover, so it's not seen as a value add if I raise my hand and ask for help. So oftentimes they find themselves this perception that it's a culture of compliance, right? The culture of compliance, that internal talk that a young person might have is the culture of my class is that I need to go try harder alone, right? Maybe I didn't do good on this assignment or this test. Maybe there's opportunities or like posted, that there's tutoring or this or that, but the culture's not there that that's a safe thing to do. So what we do in Fuse is we work with teachers to help them shift their language. So the self-talk in the young people shifts towards a culture of learning. So even if you don't use these exact words, we'll ask the students during your Fuse experience, do students in your class believe that it's a safe place to ask for help? Do students in your class believe that it's a safe place to come in for tutoring? Will that be seen as valuable? Will your teacher respect you? Things like that. So we try to shift that mindset, to what are you thinking? Let's troubleshoot collaboratively. We spend a lot of time talking about that. How can we shift our language so its mistakes are seen as learning opportunities, right? And that view of a low achievers question, that last one there, that whole idea that if we're not being transparent about it, is that questions slow down the class and pull people off track. But we want to shift that, to questions or opportunities to clarify or deeper understanding. And when Christian talks to us a little bit about reframing mistakes, we spend a lot of time at the beginning of a school year with teachers to really think through, how do I talk about mistakes in general, to help shift the overall mindset of all of my students to be seen that even if it's a lower performing student who needs that help, if they ask a question that maybe a lot of students already know, then that's something that's praised and that's something that's a value add to the entire class. So that is something that's seen as, informative, not just to that person, but to the collective, and that's how they contribute to their class as a whole. So a lot of what we do, within all of Fuse is about changing that perception. I wanted to add these slides, just a little bit more about the science. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but I already talked about, testosterone, growing in all of our young people in all of our classes. The main thing to know about testosterone is there's an opportunity, that comes from that growing or that rising in all of our students. It's that they're willing to, take a chance, they're willing to take a risk, and they're also hyper attuned to signs of respect. So that's something that we want to get some background in the science on that. But they're also hypersensitive to even, what we as adults might seem as innocuous interactions, would make them think twice and can be interpreted as a sign of disrespect, or that we're not taking them seriously. That hypersensitivity, like I said, creates an opportunity for us. That small demonstration of respect is a powerful tool that's at every teacher's disposal. And we really help think through, like, what are those moments in a classroom? It's how you talk about tests, it's how you talk about grades, and things like that. Those are your moments that we work on. Specifically in math classes, it's that perception again. Like, if students in math courses start to suspect that their teacher doesn't think they have the potential to learn and improve, they may conclude that the teacher doesn't see them as worthwhile investment of time and energy. And we know all this from all the research and the studies and all the students that we've talked to about, what is that self-talk, or what are you thinking when your teacher says this? So it's really kind of an eye-opening experience for a lot of our teams of teachers to see what how they're often misperceived by young people. Again, framing challenge as a desirable part of the learning process. Like I said, always good things to have. All right, so I'm going to talk about two quick studies that really kind of started us on this work. I think that frame, what we're about in Fuse. And then Christian's going to join us. We're going to talk a little bit about our reframing mistakes practice. And then we'll talk about what the nuts and bolts of Fuse actually look like. And then we will take any questions and call it a day. Dr. Yeager always likes to kind of open up with teachers when we talk about reframing our language and saying things in ways that tap into that, need for status and respect, and feeling that the level of support matches the level of rigor. So one thing we definitely know is that grown-splaining, over-intellectualizing something to a young person, never works. Right? It's about framing our language, in key ways that make it more likely that we'll receive the most charitable response from somebody. Because if you think about it, what we're really doing as teachers, specifically in a math classroom, is we're asking students constantly all day long to take a risk, to take a chance, or to change a behavior, or try something new, or we're making requests, right? We're making behavioral change requests, to young people. And there's multiple ways we can frame that. There's like a traditional, like hard, like old school coach, you do what I say because I'm the authority figure and I know more than you. There's the intellectual, maybe grown-splaining approach where I've been down this road and I can show you all the reasons why, this will work because I've made these mistakes. Then there's a third path, which is really what we, promote and teach in Fuse. And that's tapping into that status and respect piece and doing it with transparency. So I'm going to talk about two studies real briefly that really help our teachers, I think about stopping to kind of fear that adolescent development and thinking that we need to be, either the old school tough guy coach. We call that a demander, a demanding mindset, or a real intellectual, approach, over explaining often things, but instead taking this path. So some of the early work from our Fuse team really started with a intervention called WISE feedback. So the goal with this was we were working with some schools to try to raise the number of students who would actually revise essays. So this started in the English language arts world. And, the goal is if there's any English teachers watching, I was one early on. My dad's an English teacher. All I hear from my dad is about all the time he spends grading papers. I've heard it for, 15, 20 years, all weekend long. He sits in his chair and he grades papers. And I bet he's hoping and dreaming and believing that most of his students take that feedback, and they do something with it. They revise the essay. They, take all this thoughtful feedback and time, and it's seen as valuable to them. Oftentimes, I'm sure he's different. They all think that with him if he's watching. But for others, oftentimes, we do all that work, give all that feedback, and they look at it, and we know this because we interviewed him, is they look at it and they either like disregard it right off the bat, like they don't spend the time thinking about it, or they are offended, because they think that, I worked so hard, on this, and my teacher's, a jerk and just has all these negative things to say. So we wanted to run a few, trials and research and experiments to see how could we raise the number of students who would actually revise the essay. So you got a basic paper here, different kinds of feedback, kind of just what you'd expect, like a good job, some substantive feedback, give more detail here. I might be thinking of trying to take like a compliment sandwich approach, which typically doesn't really work because everybody can see that you're doing it, including young people. So basic, regular type of feedback that they would get. And with one group, the treatment group, we put a Post-it on their papers, says our WISE feedback approach. But basically, we put on there, it says, I'm giving you, this was like a message from the teacher. I'm giving you these comments because I have high standards and I know that you can meet them. So being transparent as to why I'm giving this feedback is because I have high standards for you. I have high level of rigor, high level of expectation. And the only reason that I'm taking the time to put this feedback on the paper and give them to you is because I know you can meet them, because I respect you enough to know that you have the ability and the desire, to meet this high standard. So I'm giving you these comments because I have a high standards and I know that you can meet them. The other group, the control group, got the basic, I'm giving you these comments so that you have feedback on your essay. So a way to kind of not really say anything, but I'm giving you these comments so you have feedback. It's kind of obvious. But we wanted to see, would just that subtle shift, in being more transparent and giving a reason as to why we're giving this feedback would have an effect and would have more students who actually revised their essays. So they were all, scrambled up, so it was all randomly controlled. Different groups of students got the different pieces. And we were excited to see, that about twice as many students who received that WISE feedback with the high standards and the assurance that we believed that they could meet them, or their teacher believed that they could meet them, twice as many of them went ahead and revised that essay. So it was a one-time experiment, with a group of teachers and group of students. So we wanted to expand that, and replicate it. And that's what we've done with Fuse. We've taken that idea that we set that high standard and the assurance that we believe that you can meet them, and built a series of practices around how do you build that culture over and over again with young people. How, when you talk about your mistakes, how do you come back to that? When you talk about grades and tests, how do you come back to that? Always coming back to that belief that they can meet that high standard. and specifically in students who were lower socioeconomic students, different ethnic populations perform much better with that WISE feedback as well. And one other, so again, showed signs of respect. They try to meet that rigorous standards, high rigor, high support. Teachers in our program say this over and over again. It's not about lowering our level of expectation, not about lowering our level of rigor. It's not that kids these days are a whole bunch of snowflakes and they need us to take care of them. It's that if we want to keep our level of rigor high, that we need to communicate our support, and the perception of the support needs to match that for them to be successful. All right, so one more quick study I want to talk about framing language and about the impact that it can have, specifically on adolescents. A lot of times we get asked questions about praising effort and positivity. Those are definitely not enough. A lot of times when we are asking our students to take chances for us, take risks, just platitudes and, just praising for somebody, showing up or something that's not seen as something that's really honorable. That's something we work with teachers a lot on as well, is that, as opposed to using a compliment sandwich, where, you showed up on time today. I got all these horrible things, not horrible, but all this feedback to give you that's, not really well, but you sat in your seat the whole time. Whether or not that's effective, everybody's going to see right through that. So if at first you don't succeed, try again. So just these kind of platitudes, that we see all the time. But instead, how can we really frame an ask, frame a request of something that is maybe not desirable, to make it more likely that a young person will meet our request. So this could be, if you're thinking about, you have a group of students who you want to maybe come in for a reteach or take a chance and give a presentation or things like that. How can we frame that ask? So we decided to run an experiment here about asking a group of college freshmen, to do something that's undesirable. And if we asked in one way versus asked in another way, would they be more likely to do that, to meet our request? So we needed something that was undesirable. And a lot of this was research around, trying to get students to, contribute to their network or their group or their society, but in a way that, or asking them to do something that they wouldn't necessarily enjoy. So if anybody's ever tasted Vegemite, apparently in Australia they love it, but the rest of the world I think tastes disgusting. So we used this, we call this the Vegemite study. So these pictures right here are pictures of college freshmen. This is what happens to your face when you taste Vegemite. So obviously it's an undesirable activity, maybe the same way that some of our students, react when we ask them to present in front of the class or raise their hand and ask for help or take a risk, anything like that. And we wanted to see is if asking in one way, a respectful way, versus asking in a way that might not be seen as respectful of the requester would have a difference. So different groups of students, and the request was, would you take part in a study, that would help students just like you. So we have a respectful way to ask and a disrespectful. One is looking at autonomy and competence, of the person you're asking, and one is threatening to that autonomy or competence. So we all started with the same first statement. So hello, my name is blank, and I'm a second-year medical student finishing basic sciences at one of the UT medical branches. I'm here to, a respectful way, ask whether you might consider taking this medicine. All right, so the ask is, I'm asking you if you might consider. Right, so the autonomy is still in your ballpark, or I'm to tell you that you should, take this medicine. So again, I'm telling you something you should do versus I'm asking whether you might consider. You are a UT student, so if those of you who aren't from Texas watching, if that's a honorific or that's a sign of respect for most of us. So you did something well to become a UT student. You are a UT student, so I figured I would explain the scientific reason why it would be helpful for you to take it. So again, showing that respect to the person that you're asking. or based on what I know about medicine and disease, the smart thing to do is to take this medicine. So the disrespectful way makes it about me, the asker, or if we're in a classroom, I'm the teacher. I want you to do this because I know it's good for you. And I've been teaching for a lot of years and I know what's best, versus you, young person, have some value. There's a reason that I want you to consider doing this for me. All right. So then some people have reported that this medicine is unpleasant to take because of the bitter taste. You already got that same message. The respectful group, you might find it helpful to think of that slight discomfort as doing your part to help others. So tapping into that desire of a young person to contribute to their society, right? So you're proving your worth, versus just try to ignore that. So try to ignore that distasteful taste. Thank you for considering this request. So again, leaving it in their ballpark. Thank you for considering it, versus thank you in advance for your cooperation. All right, so that sounds okay, but it's definitely like an assumption, right? It's assumptive, like I'm expecting you to do this for me because I've told you to. So 2 different approaches. A little over almost twice as many, students that had received the respectful message went ahead and took a second bite of the Vegemite. So that was the goal, was to get them to not only taste it the first time and see how bad it was, but then to do it again. So much better results, from students taking that respectful approach. So what we do in Fuse now is when we show the teachers that, we help them practice, where are elements, in my own instruction, when I'm talking about challenge, talking about risk, that I can shift the way I talk about it into more of a respectful approach. So just a couple examples I wanted to share before we get into the nuts and bolts. I know it's about 11:34, so we're going to keep moving along. So we have some time if anybody has any questions at the end. All right, so I want to get into some of the details now on Fuse itself. So again, it's a 2-year fellowship. Teachers from all over the world have joined. Most of them are 6th through 9th grade math teachers, but we do have science teachers. We have a few English language arts teachers. We have some assistant principals that have joined. And over those 2 years, teachers learn 10 different practices that are all around academic engagement, behavioral science, and cognitive science of adolescence. So it's some of the research that I've showed you so far, taken into the classroom, again, to help us really think through how are we communicating to students about our curriculum. We are not a curriculum. We don't promote a certain math curriculum or science curriculum. Every teacher in our program has a different curriculum. What we do is look at some of the common pieces that all curriculums have. Everybody has assessments, everybody has projects, everybody needs to reteach things. Everybody's got concepts that are easy for students to forget, and thinking through ways that we can tap into some of that brain science and the motivational science to make it more likely that they will remember some of those things. So we structure our practices into 2 groups of 5. One is all around the culture of learning. So that's 1 year in the program, is where we spend time talking about, okay, how do you communicate your beliefs and values in a respectful way? Again, that taps into that students' need for status and respect. Where might you be misinterpreted? We spend time, okay, you have your policies and procedures about grades, about retesting, about revisions. Are those aligned with what you're communicating about learning, about mindset, about what you view as a successful math classroom? Or is there alignment there? And then your language and communication. Where are there some specific things that we say as teachers and adults that we know through our research often get misinterpreted by students? So everybody says that different things. We'll talk more about this in a second, but I know when I was a teacher, I would often say, like, we've got so much to cover, or we've got to get through this today. And we've done the research to show what students are thinking in their internal talk when they hear their teacher say that. And I can guarantee you what they're not thinking is that, oh, I don't understand that. It's a safe place for me to raise my hand and ask for help, because my teacher's already said there's so much to cover. So I'm not going to do that. So that's just one example. We look at a lot of different ways that we frame our language, that's get misinterpreted by students. And then we've got 5 other practices, that teachers learn in the other year, or some in the first year, some in the second year, but they're all around the science of learning and how we communicate the science of learning to make it more likely that students will be able to recall information that they learned in October, be able to recall that, throughout the course of a year. And a lot of it's about the communication piece. So most teachers spiral content, they use different interleaving practices, space practice, things like that. But how are we communicating to our students so they're not misinterpreting why we're doing that? So if we're spiraling content, how are we communicating that so students don't think that, oh, my teacher thinks I wasn't paying attention last week, that's why he or she is going over that again. So really trying to clear up some of that miscommunication. So here is just a sample of our 10 different practices, and these are the titles of them. On our website, which I've got everybody's email addresses, we'll send out afterwards. You can see little snippets, of each of them that teachers learn throughout the 2 years. But we wanted to spend a little bit of time today just talking about one of them. So this is one of the first practices that teachers learn when they join the fellowship in the summer. And it's all about thinking through, how do I communicate mistakes? How do students perceive my interpretation of what it means to make a mistake in my class? And is it aligned with what I'm hoping to achieve? And so I just brought Christian Langford up to the podium here. So Christian's one of our lead facilitators, and she works directly with the teachers on this practice in particular. So Christian, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about it, and then I've got a couple slides from the module itself that we can talk through.
Yes, of course. So with reframing mistakes, the whole goal is to get more engagement in our classroom. And that can't happen if we say things that kind of close the door to the student's thought process and if they actually want to share out and participate. And so with reframing mistakes, we just got to really zone into things that I've said, many of the other fellows have admitted that they've said, and we don't mean anything by them as it being like negative to our students, but we just say things because that's just what we know. And we never actually got a chance to dive into the science that has been incorporated and infused. And so one, which is on your screen right now, is, I might put a warm up on the screen. And a lot of times internally, I'm thinking, warm up something we've already done. It could be something that leads into what is coming, but a lot of times it's like building from prior knowledge. And so in my head, I'm not expecting for this to take very long. I want the students to be comfortable enough to be able to dig deep and come up with the answer so we can move on. But saying that to a student is not going to get the outcome that you want. So many times I've told my students, come on, guys, this is an easy one. This will take you no time. We've done this before. Let's get this done, and then we can move on. But in the mix of that, I know that I'm just trying to encourage my students, but you got to think about, what are the actual students in your class? How are they misinterpreting what you're saying? And so you could have a student in the class that, was ready for the class to start, but then they don't remember it. It's not coming easy to them. And then they're sitting in class thinking, the teacher's not talking to me. I'm just not going to do anything because I don't get it. Therefore, I'm not even going to try. And it's going to end up creating this anxiety that you never wanted to happen in your class. So we kind of got to look at that. And with Fuse, we allow teachers to have the time to, think of these common phrases you use to start class or your common transitions that you have in your class and kind of reassess them to come up with something better to say that's more comforting to your students. So this is an example of an activity. Like I said, it's an example, but we have our fellows, build from this and actually make this individualized to their classroom. So they might have a different example on top, but we're always sure to make sure they have something to kind of go off with. So on the bottom, an example of what I could have said would have been something like, look back at your notes from yesterday to help you get started. You'll notice there's a problem that's very similar to it that can guide you if you're stuck. And I'm also going to tell them, I'm not just concerned at the answer. I want for you to get as far as you can. And I'm fine with that. And that's your way of getting students that maybe don't see themselves as finishing the problem. At least you get those students to get a good start with it, which is part of the engagement piece, which we can build off of. Now, moving along those lines, I think is there the next slide?
Yeah, can I just add a
Oh,
piece on
I'm
this?
sorry.
I
I'm just
was
talking.
just thinking, this reminds me of, like, because I used to be a executive director of teaching and learning in Round Rock. We were, buying new curriculum, and we felt we were in a pretty good spot when it came to, and I know the districts I talk to, now, if you're in Texas, whether it's using, Bluebonnet or Carnegie or any of the big curriculum providers that are out there, is if you feel like you're in a good spot, with the actual pedagogy and the curriculum and the units and everything like that, there's so many other little things that happen in a classroom, and things that are said, unintentionally by a teacher that we never really think about. And that's where Dr. Yeager and everybody on our team have done a lot of research around what are some of those moments, that we don't always focus on. And sometimes it's saying something as innocuous as "this is an easy one," or, "you guys should have learned this last year." That, until we've done the research, we didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about what is the emotional impact on engagement when something like that is said. That, through our research now, we know is so often misinterpreted, because we ask a teacher, like, he or she would never mean saying something like, "you should have learned this last year," as condescending or a put down. All right, we totally believe positive intent, but the impact that we didn't really even know we were having is harming math outcomes, because students are then less likely to raise their hand and ask for help. So I think, just to sum up, like, Fuse in general, as we spend a lot of time looking at those intangible moments, and really they're fixable, because they weren't intended by a teacher to be a negatively impactful moment. So they're easily fixable. We just need to spend some time identifying them and thinking them through. But yes, Christian, I'll let you go on. We have another.
It's just
slide.
we want to make sure we're not pushing things like speed, or you always got to be correct, or it's really think of our intentions and what are the possible outcomes. Because, like, if you're thinking about a scenario where you tell us students you should have learned this last year, well, I mean, if they didn't, okay, well, you should be able to help them. And then secondly, if that teacher didn't teach them, like, this student's in an awkward situation now, like, well, I tried, or my teacher didn't teach me, or did they teach me? It's like we got to kind of move on from that. And so part B of the activity that we would actually have our our fellows participate in is on your screen as well. And it's breaking down the different possible misinterpretations. But then are we actually instilling all of our true beliefs into our policies and procedures? So if there is a situation in the class where it's like, okay, how might that student be feeling? My teacher's trying to catch me not paying attention and embarrass me whenever I'm getting called on. So that's something a lot of teachers will do. And that's not the point of calling on someone to embarrassing them. It's to get the knowledge. But what are we doing to build up and create a good culture in our classroom where the students actually understand the reasoning why I'm calling on you? And, we will go through and we just break down some of the policies you have, and, like, how are you really going about explaining them? Infuse, like, it comes down to being like one of our practices involves our culture of learning and speech, which all these little pieces build up to that. And you have a syllabus. So all our teachers have the syllabi that you're actually going to present to your students. And that's just usually like week 1, day 1, something that you do. And your students just sit there and listen to it from every class. But do they really understand what everything means in it? And just like the flow of your class and explaining, I might call on you, I might ask you to go to the board, but explain, like, if you're uncomfortable, this could happen, or if you're stuck, you can call on a friend, and just to calm the shoulders in the classroom and ease anxiety. And so these are some of the things you could put into your policies and procedures. Instead of what's the right answer, it's, when I call on you, I might just want to know, what do you think? You don't always have to have the answer, but you can give me a step. Then you can explain things or have in your policies things about, it's not a gotcha. I'm not trying to catch you off task. You can also incorporate randomizers in your classroom. You can also have just like I said, the phone a friend option just to add comfort. But you just need to go about communicating it once you actually know what your policies and procedures are. And so on the bottom of your screen, it's something that you could say to make sure everything is crystal clear. And let's see, can I read it? It's small. It says, I know that answering questions can be scary, but when I call on you, it's not because I want to embarrass you. I want to assess the learning of all students, so I know if I need to make adjustments in the lesson. I do it because I know you have the ability to think through these questions, and I want the whole class to benefit from your thinking. So I feel Fuse, it gives you that space where, like Ryan says, you know your content, you know the curriculum, but how do we increase the engagement for those students that just won't do? And veteran teachers have been in this boat for a long time, and you have those same students that won't do anything. And so now it's time to take a step back and think about the things that we are saying. And, it doesn't hurt to try this backed by science and to see the difference that it actually makes, because it's making the difference with our current fellows.
Yeah, I hear from current fellows often, that one of the first things they notice, when they start a school year with some of our practices around, how do you talk about mistakes? How do you use a culture of learning speech in the beginning of the year to make sure you're being overly transparent, with your own beliefs about math or science or whatever it is, but then also you're overly transparent with your beliefs about like what to do when you don't know what to do, like what to do when you don't know how to answer a problem, or how you as the authority figure in the classroom are going to praise somebody that takes that risk, and we spend a lot of time talking about what you choose to praise early on, and praising things that do take a lot of guts. And there's raising your hand in the first few days of a 8th grade math class in front of your peers is a gutsy move, and when somebody does that, and you as the authority figure in the room praise that and praise how that contributes to everybody else is watching that. And so some of the feedback we often hear right off the bat from some teachers is that they just notice that many of their students who maybe weren't actively disengaged in the past, they weren't causing problems, they weren't, being disruptive, but they were so hesitant to engage in a conversation about the learning. And that through revamp and thinking through these little moments and how you can readjust them, you're much more likely to see a young person who's just willing to engage in that conversation. And once you get them to engage in the conversation, then we've got them. And we've got other practices they learn throughout the year, like one's called collaborative troubleshooting. So once we build the culture that it's a safe place to make a mistake, now we've got them in a zone where we can collaboratively troubleshoot together to get to the solution, to get to the changes that we need in a class. So that's just a glimpse, of one of the practices. Again, the teachers learn 5 in each year. And again, they're grouped in motivational science and cognitive science of learning, really work well all together. But what does it really look like? We've got about 9 minutes left. Just want to kind of paint a picture. Would love for teachers to join. We've got teachers from all over joining right now for next year. So I'm going to spend just a quick couple moments talking about what Fuse actually looks like. We actually have a small cohort starting this spring. So if any of you are watching and you'd love to get right on it, we've got a group launching February 19th. You can just scan that QR code in the upper left and set up a time. We'll hop on a call and we'll talk it all the way through. But most of our teachers will be joining in the summer. They kick off with an in-person event. There's only one in-person event that we do throughout Fuse. It's here at UT Austin. It's a hybrid event, so you could join from home or join in person. And Christian, you can see her. She's right there in the middle of that picture there. Can you just give us a 30-second of what the vibe is at the summer PLI and how great it is for teachers?
Yeah, aside from getting to mix and mingle with teachers from different districts, with the facilitators there, we are able to really get into the nitty gritty of your specific problems or issues that you're having. And from the information that we have and other teachers that are there, there's plenty of hands-on opportunities, activities for you to actually leave with, what you need. So we give you plenty of time to actually work through, come up with, what are my policies? How am I going to change these in my policies? How am I going to say this to my students so that you actually walk away the start of school ready with the actual plan. And so we're also going to have coaching sessions throughout the year. So after you get a chance to, be engaged amongst all of us, then you're going to see these same fellows, same teachers during these coaching sessions where, the facilitators will end up, checking in with all the teachers to see how things are going. So it's not just you come in the summer and then you're gone and you do what you do and don't hear from us again. There's plenty of check-ins for us to just continue to help you to make sure that you have a fused classroom.
Yeah. So as Christian said, we mentioned we start in the summer, 2.5 days, a hybrid event. Love for everybody to join here in person, but understand that travel can be tough that time of year. So it's we have live in-person facilitators, and then we've also got an online team who is actively. It's not just like sticking a camera in a corner and just live streaming the event. It's actually actively facilitated online as well in our platform with other facilitators there. So that's in the summertime. And then there's 2 full-day institutes that happen during the school year. So those are all online, virtual, and we use Canvas and Engagely as our online platforms. But that's a full-day event with Dr. Yeager and our teams, one in October and one in February. And then as Christian mentioned, there's 4 virtual coaching meetings that happen during the school year as well. So these happen outside the school day, either in the morning or afternoon. But this is really just a way to, as Christian mentioned, just to kind of keep the learning. It's like a steady drip of engagement throughout a school year. So it's real intense in the summer. Everybody comes together. It's high energy, exciting. And then throughout the year, it's just kind of a intentional, continuous communication from us, back and forth. And we make all these practices are suggestions. We want everybody to try them out, tweak them, make them fit in their context. And really make them their own. It's not like teachers have like certain homework assignments, they need to be done. They do modules that they do during our events, and then really just implement them throughout the year. The third kind of leg of the stool of Fuse are the student modules. And I'm thinking next month I might just spend this whole time talking about the student engagement module piece. But students in all Fuse teachers' classrooms also complete 3 modules during the year. This really helps them better understand their own mindset development, their own kind of why they're feeling that need to have a purpose, and contribute. The one they do in January is all about reframing and reappraising stress, to better understand that just because you feel those butterflies in your stomach heading into a big exam or a big performance, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means your body's getting ready to prime to do something challenging. So just that mindset shift, in a young person can have huge, impacts on how they view themselves, when they feel nervous, which is a normal part of doing something challenging. But it's really just that reminder that that's normal. You should feel that way because this is important. Then we work with the teachers to make sure that their language, even around that, is aligned with that reappraisal of stress. So, and actually we have our spring institutes in a couple of weeks. And we'll be spending time at those talking about, your students just did the synergistic mindset intervention where they learned how to reappraise stress. So if you notice a student leading into a state exam or an AP test who it seems nervous or anxious or excited about it, rather than say things like, you don't need to worry, or you've got this, different platitudes that we might have said in the past, we can reframe our own language as adults to say things like, it's completely normal that you feel that way because you've been working hard and this is important to you. And that's your body getting ready to do something challenging. And if you didn't feel that way, that might be different. That might be weird. But the way you're feeling now is natural and normal and expected. So really just helping, again, as adults, reframing our language with young people. And the last piece, teachers in the program, they earn $1,000. So they get $1,000 honorarium that's paid half in the fall, half in the spring. There is a charge to school districts. Typically, a school district will sign up their teachers. So again, if you want to learn more about pricing for your own district, things like that, scan that QR code in the upper, I think it's in your left. It's the only QR code on the screen. It's in my left. But scan that. You schedule a time to meet with me. We can talk about costs, things like that. But all teachers in the fellowship program earn $1,000 directly back from UT for participating. And then a couple last things before we sign off for the day. We also do executive leadership series sessions, do 4 of them throughout the year. Got one coming up in a couple weeks. In our follow-ups, or if you go to our Substack, we've got recordings from the previous ones. And what these are is they're an opportunity for all the principals, assistant principals, central office leaders to also join and learn a lot of the same ideas that teachers are learning in Fuse. That whole reframing mistakes piece that we talked about today, Dr. Yeager did a whole session back in August. Again, I'll send that to everybody. I'm really working with APs and principals about how can you reframe your language about mistakes when working with maybe new staff members who you need to give some feedback to, and how can you give that feedback in a way that, again, has a higher likelihood of getting the most charitable response back. Thank you, Catherine, for putting that in the chat. Some examples we have are like, okay, you're a new assistant principal and you need to go have a conversation with a new young staff member who is going to have their first parent-teacher conference. And you don't want to come off as the leader as being condescending, or you don't want that person to think that you think they're immature. So what are some ways to structure that feedback that you can be more transparent in the beginning so you don't get that misconception? Or maybe you need to go have a conversation with a new young staff member about appropriate dress or being to work on time, things like that. So a lot of other value adds in the program as well. That link there, so you can sign up to attend our next one if you like. They're open to anybody who would like to join. Our next one is actually with Kevin Carroll on culture of learning. He's another member of the team here at UT, does a lot of work with our athletics departments and building culture in their programs. Also works with a lot of schools. That's gonna be February 18th at 2:00. See, you've got some people signing up right now. Appreciate that. But those are open to anybody. If you fill out that form that Catherine put there, then you'll get an invite to join live. If not, we post them on our Substack also afterwards. All right, just a couple last things before we sign off. Next steps, I think I've mentioned it 10 or 20 times, it seems like so far. But really, our ask is that you reach out, and if what you heard today resonates at all, or you think this could be a good fit for your secondary teachers, we really focus on, our main focus is 6th through 9th grade math, but we do have quite a few teachers in the fellowship who are beyond that in upper level math classes or in science classes. So either way, I'd love to chat with you about how we could incorporate this into your campuses, your work. If you're not a campus leader or district leader, and maybe you lead a teacher development program, we've been getting some calls out from them. Reach out to me also. We're starting to look at how we can partner with different teacher prep programs to implement some of our work in your curriculum as well. So really, anyway, if what you heard today or Dr. Yeager's work resonates with you, reach out and we'll talk about what that could look like. I think, that was my last slide. This is just a picture of our team. Nice quote here from Dr. Yeager. Fuse was designed so teachers have a library of resources, a network of colleagues, and dedicated time to think carefully about how they would like to use this important science. So that's our team here at UT. I'm going to go back to the slide with the QR code on it. And I think that is kind of our call for, we do these, like I said, we do these once a month. If you go to our, like I said, go to our Substack again, you can see the last few. We pick a different one of our practices each time. Last month, we talked about the exam speeches. I think the month before that, we looked at engaging brains with prediction, I believe was our month that time. Next month, we're going to be looking at the optimizing memory encoding practice. So we'll send out invites for that, but would love to chat with anybody about potential next steps.